Hi, I'm Nisha Pahuja. I'm the director of To Kill a Tiger.
And I'm Mike Munn, the co-editor of To Kill a Tiger, and you're listening to the Cinematography Podcast.
The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography Podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Ilya Friedman.
Hi, welcome to the Cinematography Podcast. This is your producer, Alana Cody, and today we have another special bonus episode. I had the opportunity to interview director Nisha Pahuja and editor Mike Munn about their documentary To Kill a Tiger, which is nominated for an Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. So, a warning before you listen, this interview does discuss the topic of sexual assault and violence, so please take care. To Kill a Tiger is a story of Ranjit, who is a rice farmer in a small village in the state of Jharkhand in India, and his 13-year-old daughter is raped by 3 men from her village. Ranjit is determined to get justice for his daughter through the legal system. In India, this is actually really rare. Men rarely stand up for their daughters, and convictions for rape are less than 30%. So it's more common in the village where they're from for a girl to get married off to their abuser instead. But Ranjit and his family were determined that they were going to find justice for her. So they had to keep traveling to the city to go to court, and they fought really hard, and they often faced down threats of violence and ostracism from the other townspeople who thought that they shouldn't be, taking this all the way to the court, that they should just handle it in their own way in the village. So here's my interview with the filmmakers. I hope you enjoy. Again, it's nominated for an Academy Award for Best Documentary.
The Cinematography Podcast interview.
I'm here with To Kill a Tiger, director Nisha Pahuja and editor Mike Munn. And To Kill a Tiger is nominated for an Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. Congratulations on the nomination, and thank you so much for coming on the Cinematography Podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Starting with you, Nisha, can you tell me a little bit about how you found the film and what your path was to get to this story?
So when I started making the film, the original idea was to make a documentary that was looking at masculinity in India. And I was following the work of a local gender rights organization, a local organization called the Srijan Foundation. And along with another big Dalit group, they were running a program, a gender sensitization program in 30 villages across the state of Jharkhand. And what they were doing is they were working with men and boys, teaching them a different way of being male. And the program was running for 3.5 years. It's a really intensive program. And Ranjit, who is the father in the film, was somebody that was enrolled in that program. And that's how I came across the story. And I began to follow his journey over time, while at the same time continuing to film with other participants in the gender sensitization program. And at that time, we were all thinking that we would take these 3 threads and make one film out of the material.
So then you found out about the rape of the young woman and girl, and it was through that organization that you found the family?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when did you decide to change the focus? Was it when you were still filming the original storyline, or?
In the edit.
In the edit?
So I filmed for 3.5 years. I filmed the story of the family for 18 months. For me, that was one strong thread. And then there were 2 other threads using the world of that gender sensitization program, and worked in the edit for just over 2 years, I think. And it was about 2.5 years of editing where we realized that we had 2 separate films in the material. So then we focused exclusively on the story of Ranjit and his family.
Talk a little bit about when you were going through this process, though, building the trust that you had with Ranjit and his daughter, Kiran.
Well, just like anything, right? When you're making documentary and you're in the field, and especially when you're dealing with material that is really sensitive, it just takes time. And I think it took as much time for me to feel comfortable filming them as it did for them to be filmed, right? Like it wasn't easy for me to be following the story, especially the first couple of months. And also I didn't have any time to build a relationship with them beforehand. Like I met them, the first time I met them, I had a camera in my hand, So it took time to build that trust. But once that trust came, it really, I think, defined the film. And I think in many ways, it's probably the most intimate film I've made.
And then I know that it was a process too, where at first it's because she's only 13 when this happened, that it was a process of hiding her identity and then coming to a way to maybe not have to.
Yeah, I mean, Mike can speak to that as well. But in the field, when I was filming her, I decided very consciously to not film her in a way that would make her feel left out or, discriminated against. Like I filmed her exactly as I was filming everybody else, which initially wasn't my thought. I thought I would film her in a more abstract kind of way initially. And then I realized that just was going to probably make her feel like she had done something wrong. I didn't want to exacerbate already that kind of pressure and that sense of shame that she was feeling. And so we decided that we would find some way to mask her identity in post-production. And we were very particular and very specific about what we wanted that masking technique to achieve. It was essentially to hide her while at the same time retaining a sense of who she is and a sense of her identity and presence, right? She has a very strong presence. So we tried a number of different things. Mike can talk about them. We tried so many different things, like so many different things. By the time we were finished, she was an adult. And so, we just started to ask her about, how would you feel about being shown, how do you feel about that? And she wanted to see the film, of course. So my sound recordist, Anita, flew to Ranjit and showed the family the film. And they just loved it. It was a fine cut of the film and they just loved it. And they just said yes. She said yes right away. And I called her the next day to find out why, right? Like I wanted to have a sort of a real kind of heart-to-heart with her about it. And she said that it was because she couldn't believe how courageous she was when she was watching herself. She couldn't believe her own courage and her own bravery. And she wanted to celebrate that.
Yeah, I had a question about that. I mean, like do you have a kind of an idea of how did they find the courage? I mean, the whole village was against them. The, village leader, I guess you would call him a mayor, sort of. He was very dismissive of the whole thing. And were they supported by the NGO that was trying to with that?
Yeah, I think the NGO, I think they felt supported by the NGO. I think they felt supported by the crew. But I think Ranjit was really driven by the love of his child.
Yes.
I think that was so central to everything for him. Like I remember when Mike and I were looking at that, remember that footage, Mike, of when he says him on the cot, right? Bus stop.
Yeah.
When we're looking at that material, I think the thing that really struck us was almost like at the moment where it's because he'd just been threatened with murder, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, at the worst moment of his life is when he kind of rose to the challenge and he says, if my 13-year-old daughter, if my child is saying don't drop the case and I'd rather die than give in, then of course she's that brave, then I have to be that brave as well.
Yeah.
Right. It's a remarkable scene because you see all of that thought process happening in real time on his face, and he's expressing it as it's coming into his mind. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah, they're both so expressive. I mean, that's really I think part of what makes it too, is just being able to read all their emotions on their faces and see what they're really going through. And I was wondering, like, was there at any point where you thought they were just going to give up?
Yeah, for sure. And I wouldn't have blamed them also. Yeah. And that's in that scene where he says, I'm not going to, I'm going to keep fighting, right? In spite of the death threats. In that scene, in the footage, I remember having this long kind of conversation with him about what was motivating him, and did it have anything to do with, feeling obligated to the crew or obligated to the NGO. So many power dynamics in India that you have to be aware of, and you have to be conscious of. So, those conversations were always had. But I just think Ranjit is the kind of person who, it's inside of him, this idea of doing the right thing. He's just a very ethical, thoughtful person.
Yeah, I mean, I admire his courage. I mean, they were really standing up to this old way of doing things. Just marry her off. That's what we do here. Ignore it. Yeah, I mean, that takes a lot of courage to change. So I was curious, too, did you think that, well, two things, really. Do you think the film crew was helping to protect them in a way from the backlash? Or was it...
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah,
okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe not so much at the time, but I was told that by them. Mm-hmm. And then I was told that recently by some activists in India who I really trust. And that made me feel relieved.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yes, that for sure, that the crew and the filming gave them a level of protection, even though it exacerbated the situation and it was controversial and the villagers wanted us out. But it did offer them protection.
And do you think that the court decision and everything that resulted after changed the attitudes in the village?
Not the no. Okay. Because I mean that stuff takes so long. Like it will change the way people act. It will have an impact, and people will think twice about things, and maybe some people will question their beliefs, but very few. It's one thing to change someone's action. It's another thing to change how somebody thinks about something. And so, yes, it may have impacted how people respond. Don't know if it's changed dramatically how people think.
Okay. Yeah, well, I guess with time. I mean, like I said, women here still get that all the time. Why did you do that? Why didn't you? How dare you stay out late? How dare you wear lipstick and nail polish? It's like... yeah, God forbid it be a man's fault, Anyway, so then, I was curious too. And so your husband, since we are about cinematography, I did have a couple questions about that. He was the cinematographer for this. So can you tell me a little bit about what that was like and working that closely with him? And
we had a number of DPs that were brilliant on this film. Mrinal was sort of like, I guess he shot a big chunk of it, the majority of it. And he is, Mike should actually, I'll say what it's like for me, but Mike, I think Mike has a beautiful way of talking about Mrinal's work. But what I will say is that for me in the field, what he brings, and it's not just him, but it's also my sound recordist, Anita. I think the three of us, because we've worked together for so long, we know each other so well, we just have a way of creating a kind of space for people. And I think that's where the intimacy, that's where the intimacy and trust comes from. And Mrinal, both of them also are very, very quiet. Not all crews are quiet, but Mrinal and Anita are very quiet. And so they just kind of blend into the background, and they're gentle. And I think that really has an effect. Kiran, for example, there were times where I would ask her, could you go from here to here? I just want to get a shot of you doing this. And she would say, no, I don't want to do it. She's a really, really strong-willed person, very, very strong. You could not get her to do something she didn't want to do. So she would say no. And I would say, oh, please, I just need to get the shot because the light bulb. And Ronald would say to her in his lovely, sonorous voice, child, can we just do this one shot? And she would just say, yes, okay. So he's a real asset.
That's great. And then, how was it? Because it took many years. Did you fly back and forth together a lot? Like, did you stay in India the whole time? Like, and then living with the story for so long, was that difficult kind of with your partnership?
Yeah. Well, we had a house, like we rented a house because I was there for 3.5 years. So we rented a house in Ranchi, which is the city that was, closest to the village. And what would happen is I would spend a lot of time there. I would set things up. I'd figure things out. I'd get a sense of where, things were going. And then the crew would come and we would sometimes we'd stay there for a month or 5 weeks, sometimes 8 days. It really kind of depended on what was going on, because I was also tracking 2 other storylines, right? I was also filming 2 other storylines. So we were there a lot. We spent a lot of time on the ground there. And whenever you're filming with your husband or wife, right, it's difficult.
And so let's just kind of like go into the editing process. Now, you were saying that, so you had a mess of footage, basically, I guess, or you had an idea of where the direction where the film you thought you wanted to go. So then when Mike came in, what changed for you with that? And I guess you were working with, there was another editor as well. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. When so Dave Kazala, a great editor, he started the project, and he was assembling and rough cutting for a little over a year, I think. And, I think when I came in, there was a 9 or a 10-hour assembly of scenes, and there were some other scenes that were still to be dealt with. But Dave had to move on to something else, so Nisha asked me to step in. And so I took it from that point. About 8 months, though, after I came on, they were still dealing, we were still dealing with the entire film, which was this bigger film about masculinity. And so I worked for about 8 months on the film with Nisha, trying to work all the threads into this bigger film. Ranjit's story was only one of 3 major stories. So I really had a hard time getting it down under 3 hours. And then we started talking a bit about like, oh, well, maybe it should be a 2-part series, 2 hours or something like that. And so for a little bit, we were thinking about that, because it became apparent that as I was cutting it down, Ranjit's story in particular was losing a lot of its power, right? Because in that version, it was only somewhere between 45 and 50 minutes. So you can imagine it was basically cut in half. So all of the things that are there that make it so powerful, a lot of the things weren't there. So anyway, at one point we decided, I was starting to have the inkling that, things weren't really going together. There was something that wasn't really kind of fitting. So we had this kind of confab of other editors that we trust, some of the best doc editors in Canada, I think. And we got a few people together and had them look at it. And sort of almost instantaneously, the consensus was that there was actually 2 films. We were wrestling a lot because we had, in fact, 2 different films. And it wasn't even about length. It was really like the 2 films can't exist together in the same film. So Ranjit's film was so specific about the story was so specific and so well drawn out that it needed its own place. So from that moment we jettisoned all of that work and material that we'd done. Like 2/3 of the material, roughly. It was a big deal for me, but for Nisha especially, having shot it all and set it all up. I mean,
and this is after how many years? Like 3 years?
Well, that would be. Yeah. That would be well into maybe a little over 2 years of editing all told. So, to pivot like that in a process it's a really hard thing to do. But, eventually we came to terms with it and we could put all our energy into Ranjit's story. So I started reassembling and broadening out Ranjit's story again because I'd compressed it so much. So I went back to kind of earlier versions. And so then when we were focused on Ranjit's story, we could, that was clear. The path was clear. That we could, we were still juggling some structural stuff within Ranjit's story. But once we kind of got over that hurdle, then it was kind of clear sailing to the end. So in a nutshell, that was it.
I was just going to say, I mean, the great thing about shifting focus was that we were then able to kind of flesh out, not just Ranjit and his relationship with his wife, but also just giving her more space. Like, it had sort of a clear narrative arc, and it was a real blessing.
Yeah. Well, you have to go where the story takes you, right?
Yeah.
Like you just have
so much of documentary is that, taking it, going where it
get out of the way.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let the story tell you where it's going.
Yeah,
exactly.
So do you think you'll go back and make something out of the rest of what you have, or is it just that's done?
Actually, for a couple of months, before New Year's, I've been reassembling all of that material because we just left it behind and in its state it was in. So I spent a couple of months going into the older versions of all that material, which, as I say, because we started compressing everything. So we sailed past the best versions. So I reassembled all that stuff into a cut that Nisha and I, when the smoke clears from all of this Oscar hullabaloo, we're going to sit down and watch it and decide what needs to be done. Whether there's enough material there to make a film or because we removed Ranjit's story from it, do does there need to be more shooting? What's going to be required? So we'll have to spend a little time assessing the footage, but the goal is to have that film finished at some point.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And so actually going back, Mike, I know you did the editing for Stories We Tell. That was, I've seen that. Right. Great movie. Love it. We've interviewed Iris Eng, who was the cinematographer for that too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, there's another great documentary DOP. She is awesome. Did amazing work on that. Yeah.
One of the things for To Kill a Tiger that I was curious about, so, I guess you've done it before, but working in doing editing and working in another language, that must have been kind of challenging.
Yeah. Well, it's less challenging than you'd think because all of the rushes were transcribed and translated and subtitled. So there was, I think we had, my assistant and I were trying to figure out exactly how much in terms of time or length, how much footage we had, but there was 157 shoot days. And we were just sort of thinking, if it averaged 6 or 7 hours a day, that would be, at that between 1,000 and 1,200 hours of footage. But in India, the footage by a team of people was transcribed and rudimentary subtitles were put on it. So when I get those scenes, I know what they're saying based on the subtitles. And if some of them are, because the people that are doing the subtitles, their first language is English, so we would kind of polish, like I'd kind of get Pranay Nishani, my assistant, a native Hindi speaker, he would help me along the way with polishing the subtitles. But I mean, it's kind of, as long as you have the subtitle, it's really like editing in any language. You know when a sentence finishes and you know when a sentence begins. It's pretty soon you're just kind of working with it as if it is English.
Okay.
So it's less problematic than you'd think. One of the important things at the end of the process is, and Dave, the original editor, came back and helped us for about a month with this, is polishing the subtitles themselves, because we would sit with Hindi speakers and say, well, what are they actually saying? Because it was just kind of a first pass when the original subtitles were done, and sometimes idioms in Hindi, what's the translation of that in English? What's the phrase that matches that in English, or those kind of things. So it's a bit of a process to make sure the English is solid. Like you're reading proper English and that the idioms are accurate to what the meaning is, that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, I was just curious because it seems like it would be challenging as an editor if you're like, this is not my native language.
Yeah, well, there was a few times where there was a subtitle. And somebody's talking for like 30 seconds or a minute, and there's like a one-sentence subtitle. So I would say to Pranay, this person's obviously saying more than what that says, what's actually happening there. So there would be that. And then if I had to construct a sentence, or I had to change the tense of a sentence or something just to make it flow better, I would have to give that to Pranay to do, right? He'd have to actually like cut the Hindi to have it make sense. And the odd time I would like cut out of a sentence before the last word, thinking the last word was part of the next sentence. So there was a bit of correction there as well. Yeah.
What was your favorite part about working on the film?
My favorite part overall was working with the observational and verite nature of the film. It was so intimate and real and raw, creating scenes out of real emotion. It lent itself to structure. There's suspenseful areas. Yeah. There's other things. Those are all storytelling things that exist in documentary and scripted. So it's a specific kind of experiential, observational style of filmmaking that I'd done a bit of before. Not a lot of what I do in the doc world, not in scripted, but in the doc world is interview based, right? Where you're getting information from talking heads or voiceovers giving you the story. This was a film where the narrative was all happening within real scenes with the family. And that was challenging, but rewarding in just the truthfulness of it. I think just being there with them, you kind of felt, as you do as an audience, you kind of felt as an editor that you're in that living room with them.
Yeah, and time, I mean, did the subject matter ever sort of creep into you, or
yeah, Well, I think in the early, difficult. I know what you mean. I think early on, with the shock of seeing things for the first time, of course. But then, as you gradually move through it, you're kind of stepping out a bit and looking at it as a story and what's the best way to tell that. So I think you have a kind of a professional distance from it at some point. But of course, what I'm getting at in the scenes when I'm cutting is what that feeling was to them. I mean, just trying to be, to to help an audience see what's happening and feel it as well, feel what I was, passing on what I was feeling when I first saw it. And so, yeah.
And of course, you have the advantage of what's going to happen. I guess that's a good thing about the film too, is that like everything was wrapped, so you kind of it's not left to left in limbo about what's going to happen next.
Exactly. In this case, it was they weren't still shooting, so we kind of knew the whole picture where we were going to begin and where we were going to end. Also, in this case, sometimes you have an inherent chronology, right? So this is the incident, the assault near the beginning all the way to the verdict, right? So you have that sort of structure anyway. But, within that, there's interviews that take place at different times. There's, some of the scenes were juggled a bit in terms of when they went to the court, that kind of thing, just to have it make sense as a story. Yeah. But more when we were dealing with the whole film and figuring out how Ranjit's story was going to thread through this greater story of masculinity and these other characters, was that was the tricky, really challenging part, because in fact we were trying to solve something that in the end couldn't be solved. It was a bit like, putting a round peg into a square hole. Like we really wanted to try and make that bigger film, but it really, as we were saying earlier, the material told us that it needs to be 2 films. And if we can get the other film finished, they'll be really good companion films, because the broader film on masculinity will give context to the Ranjit story. So you can watch them and they'll inform, each of them will inform the other.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. And it's definitely something I think that also needs to be told more. When we were speaking a little bit earlier about how, that way of thinking takes longer to change, Yeah, that's right. And the broader story of masculinity, and it was one of the reasons why it was tough to put them together. One of the main themes of the bigger story is that men are also victims of this system that's been in place for thousands of years, and so the bigger theme is that everyone's a victim, men and women, but putting that in a story where the main focus is on this young girl who's been assaulted, just, it was too much to kind of do that all at once. That was such a specific story. And to have a film where one of the big themes is as men are victims as much as anybody was tough to make fit with a young girl who's been assaulted by 3 men, so it's, that's maybe simplifying it, but it was really, I think, one of the things at the core of why it wouldn't mesh together. So. Yeah. And so where can people find you if they want to, do you have social media or,
I'm not big,
a website
or
anything like that? Or,
I do have a website, although I have to update it. It's MikeMunnEditor.com, MikeMunn editor.com, and it will be updated soon. So
great. Most people who are busy working don't have time to update their websites. It's true.
Yeah, that's right. No, I've got to get on that because it's been a while. But
sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Cinematography Podcast.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.